From the dojo to the octagon, this is Budocast, your source for the latest in martial arts news, culture, and competition. From breaking fight results to evolving techniques, we cover it all. Let's get into it. Imagine swinging a heavy wooden baseball bat with absolutely everything you have.
Oh, man. Just a full power swing.
Exactly. Like you swing it so incredibly hard that if you somehow miss the ball, your own violent momentum will physically spin you around. You'd go face first right into the dirt.
Right, because you're totally off balance at that point.
Yeah. Now, I want you to imagine doing that exact same thing, but with your bare fists and against the most highly trained, dangerous men walking the face of the earth.
Yeah, it is a completely terrifying visual, honestly.
Right. That total, terrifying, 100% commitment to violence isn't a mistake, though. As we'll discover today, it is the deliberate, calculated secret behind the Ultimate Fighting Championship's biggest rising star.
It really perfectly encapsulates the stakes we're dealing with here. Because, when you swing the bat like that, you are essentially trading your own safety for maximum destructive yield.
I mean, you're totally surrendering the ability to pull back.
Exactly. You physically cannot stop the punch once it's thrown.
And today, we are going to look at what happens when someone tries to step inside the arc of that massive swing. We have a huge stack of sources today spanning the entire spectrum of combat sports.
It's a really diverse lineup of topics.
It really is. We are diving into the tactical breakdowns of the historic upcoming UFC White House event. We're analyzing the bloody, gritty reality of the UFC Vegas 118 aftermath.
And we're also unpacking a pretty controversial editorial about the UFC's complex political history, right?
Yes, and even exploring a deeply personal essay about the psychology of martial arts. So we are looking at the business, the blood, and the human brain today.
Well, if we lay all these, seemingly disparate sources out on the table and examine them really closely, a single conceptual through line emerges.
What's the main theme you're seeing?
Today's deep dive is entirely about control. And I don't just mean control in a vague, abstract sense. I mean literal mechanical leverage.
Oh, that's interesting. Like physical control in the cage.
Exactly. Whether it's a fighter controlling the center of the cage through sheer kinetic pressure, or a corporate promoter controlling a business narrative to secure, billions of dollars in media rights.
Or even an individual taking control of their own chaotic life through the daily discipline of the martial arts gym.
Spot on. The theme of dominance, leverage, and resilience ties all of this together perfectly.
Well, let's start by unpacking this idea of control where it is the most visceral, right inside the cage.
Because long before a fighter can physically impose their will on an opponent, they require a flawless architectural blueprint.
A map of control, basically. We're beginning with the massive UFC Freedom 250 event taking place at the White House.
Which is just, the cultural visuals of an octagon on the White House lawn are going to be completely surreal.
Oh, it's going to be wild. But we need to strip away the spectacle and dig directly into the tactical mechanics of the two massive title fights headlining this card. Let's start with the main event.
Ilia Topuria versus Justin Gaethje for the lightweight title.
Yeah. And our source here brings some phenomenal insight from former middleweight champion Dricus du Plessis. What's his take on this?
Dricus, or DDP, as the combat sports world knows him, offers a highly clinical lens on this matchup. He actually refers to Topuria as the biggest star in the sport right now.
Wow, the absolute biggest.
Yeah, but he goes further than just praising his popularity. DDP points out that Topuria doesn't just defeat his opponents, he dismantles them in ways the modern game simply hasn't processed yet.
Right, because the sheer concussive force he generates within the tight confines of the pocket is historically elite.
It really is. But looking across the cage, DDP places Justin Gaethje in his top 3 favorite fighters of all time.
And the reason is totally psychological, isn't it?
Exactly. DDP says Gaethje goes out to kill. Gaethje's not stepping onto the White House lawn to score points or outtouch Topuria.
No, not at all. For those who might not follow his career religiously, Justin Gaethje has willingly walked through the absolute worst fires the sport has to offer.
Yeah, he has had his face broken, his vision blurred, and he just keeps marching forward.
He will not be intimidated by the political lights or Topuria's aura of invincibility. But sheer bravery is not a kinetic game plan, right?
Oh, definitely not.
Yeah.
Bravery gets you knocked unconscious if your footwork is wrong.
Exactly. So what are the actual mechanical details DDP sees as Gaethje's path to victory here?
Well, DDP lays out a very specific spatial blueprint. He argues that Gaethje's path to victory relies heavily on weaponizing distance through his leg kicks.
And entirely avoiding standing in the pocket.
Yes, exactly. If you aren't familiar with the terminology, the pocket is that terrifying invisible phone booth where you are close enough to land a punch on your opponent.
Which inherently means they are close enough to land on you. It's the kill zone.
Right. DDP implies that if Gaethje stands foot to foot in that zone and exchanges boxing combinations, Topuria's hand speed and power will end the fight instantly.
So he has to stay on the outer edge of striking range and utilize his devastating calf kicks. We should really explain the biomechanics of those calf kicks, too.
Because it's not just a slap on the leg.
Far from it. A properly thrown calf kick targets the peroneal nerve right below the knee. When a shin bone connects with that nerve bundle, it temporarily shuts down the electrical signals to the lower leg.
The foot just goes entirely numb.
Yeah, the fighter literally cannot push off the mat to generate power or even step backward to evade. Gaethje has used this exact technique to chop down the structural foundations of some of the best strikers in the world.
Precisely. You disable the opponent's mobility first, turning them into a stationary target.
And once the legs are compromised?
DDP says Gaethje can establish relentless forward pressure to set up a knockout shot. He specifically highlights the high head kick Gaethje used to knock out Dustin Poirier as the ultimate weapon to watch out for.
Because Topuria has a history of dipping his head heavily to the side when he evades punches, right?
Exactly, which inadvertently places his head directly into the trajectory of a high kick. Topuria has actually been dropped by head kicks in the past because of this exact biomechanical habit.
But here is the paradox in DDP's analysis. Despite laying out a highly plausible, mechanically sound path to victory for Gaethje, DDP still ultimately predicts a Topuria win.
Because he describes Topuria as, quote, too calculated.
Yeah, Gaethje absolutely possesses the tools to dismantle the foundation, but Topuria's processing speed and his internal risk management algorithms might just overwrite Gaethje's offense.
Well, let's elevate this from a fighter's perspective to a mastermind coach's perspective. We have some great quotes from Gaethje's head coach, Trevor Wittman.
The founder of ONX Sports, Wittman is widely considered one of the great tactical savants in mixed martial arts.
He really is. And Wittman and Gaethje didn't just watch Topuria's recent highlights. They specifically isolated and studied Topuria's 2022 knockout of Jai Herbert.
That Jai Herbert fight is basically the Rosetta Stone for anyone trying to decipher Ilia Topuria.
It absolutely is. In that 2022 bout, Topuria actually faced profound adversity. He got dropped hard by a head kick.
Which directly validates DDP's point about that specific vulnerability.
Right, and he was getting outstruck from a distance early in the fight. But Topuria survived the trauma, pressed forward, backed Herbert against the steel chain link of the cage, and folded him with a vicious body shot in the second round.
And then landed a right hook that completely separated Herbert from his consciousness.
Coach Wittman analyzed the slow-motion footage of that exact sequence and identified a critical behavioral tendency.
What did he see?
When Topuria finally decides to commit to a multi-strike combination, he throws every single punch at 100% power. Every ounce of his mass transfers into the strike.
Which brings us right back to the baseball bat analogy we opened with.
Exactly. Wittman also observed a secondary behavioral loop. When Topuria gets genuinely hurt, his default reflex is to abandon the striking entirely and dive for a wrestling takedown.
So Coach Wittman is actively identifying the neurological triggers here.
He is looking at the primal safety loops Topuria falls into when his brain registers a serious threat. And that is the essence of elite fight preparation.
Wittman's stated goal is to mathematically understand Topuria's game without ever getting drawn into the specific chaos that favors Topuria.
He wants to map the patterns. Think about the physics of that 100% power commitment. Topuria throwing a combination isn't just a heavy punch, it's a human trebuchet.
Right. Once he commits his center of gravity forward, the counterweight drops and the arm swings.
He physically cannot pull that punch halfway through its arc. His mass is fully committed to the trajectory. So if Gaethje knows that total commitment is coming, the strategy isn't to block it.
The strategy is to step laterally off the center line at the exact millisecond the trebuchet fires.
Yes. If you do that, Topuria's own violent momentum becomes a massive liability. He will over-rotate, exposing his back or his jaw.
And regarding the wrestling, if you know Topuria's panic response is to shoot for the legs, you just drill the defensive sprawl until it is automatic.
Exactly. Listening to Wittman detail this, it sounds like he is programming Gaethje to fight like a matador.
Wittman explicitly states in our source material, we are not going to fight his fight, we want to fight our fight.
You stand just out of range, you wave the red cape, and you let the bull's momentum carry it into the sword.
But let's look at the reality of this. If Topuria's triggers are so blatantly obvious on tape, if every coach in the division knows he swings like a trebuchet and shoots when he's hurt, why hasn't anyone been able to successfully capitalize on it?
That is the big question.
I mean, is mapping the pattern on a whiteboard really enough to stop a 100% power combination from a man who moves with superhuman twitch reflexes?
That right there exposes the massive chasm between theory and application in combat sports. Knowing a strike is coming and possessing the neurological speed to evade it are two entirely different universes.
Because of his rotational speed, right?
Yeah. Yes. His rotational speed, the torque he generates from his hips, and the sheer unpredictability of exactly when he decides to launch that combination make it a nightmare to counter in real time.
Because the average human brain takes roughly a quarter of a second to process visual information and send an electrical signal to the muscles to react.
Exactly. And Topuria's strikes often cover the distance and land within that tiny processing window.
Wow. So by the time your brain registers the movement, the punch is already connected with your jaw.
Precisely. So Trevor Whitman's job isn't just to intellectually explain the pattern to Gaethje. His job is to spend weeks in the gym physically drilling the evasion to that specific angle.
He has to drill it so deeply into Gaethje's central nervous system that Gaethje reacts before his conscious brain even registers the threat.
Muscle memory has to completely bypass conscious thought.
It's a fascinating look at the limits of human reaction time. Now, speaking of terrifying power that breaks all the rules of physics, let's transition to the co-main event of UFC Freedom 250.
This one is going to be massive.
We have Alex Pereira defending against Ciryl Gane for the interim heavyweight title, and the narrative surrounding this fight is incredibly layered.
It really is, especially with Ciryl Gane's training camp.
Yeah, Gane is preparing for Pereira by actively training with a man named Artem Vakitov.
And Vakitov is a highly decorated Russian kickboxer.
Crucially, he holds the distinction of being the last man on earth to defeat Alex Potan Pereira in a pure striking match. It was a majority decision victory at Glory 78.
Bringing Vakitov into the training camp is the ultimate utilization of a specialist. Vakitov has been exhaustively revisiting the tape of his own violent encounters with Pereira
to formulate a highly specific, personalized scouting report for Gane.
Exactly. And Vakitov's assessment is incredibly provocative. He describes Pereira as having minimal technique, but very effective strikes.
And he refers to his fist as stone hands.
Vakitov openly acknowledges that Pereira has generated a highlight reel of unconscious bodies across both kickboxing and MMA. But when he diagnoses the major structural weakness, he points to his openness.
Right. Vakitov claims that while Pereira possesses an apocalyptic offense, his defensive architecture is fundamentally flawed.
I want to dissect that phrase, minimal technique. To a casual observer, that sounds like a massive insult to a two-division UFC champion.
Oh, totally. But in the context of elite biomechanics, I see it differently.
It is the furthest thing from an insult. In the highest echelons of striking, minimal technique is a compliment regarding efficiency.
It means the complete absence of wasted kinetic energy.
Exactly. Pereira does not throw spinning, jumping, or flashy strikes that expend unnecessary oxygen. His mechanics are boiled down to their most brutally efficient, foundational core.
He throws standard left hooks, straight right hands, and low kicks, but he throws them with flawless skeletal alignment. Every bone is stacked perfectly to transfer force.
However, that openness Vakitov highlights is a critical observation. Pereira fights with a very upright posture, and his hands held dangerously low near his chest.
He relies entirely on his height, his massive reach, and his microscopic understanding of distance to lean his head backward away from punches,
rather than keeping a tight, high guard to block them. In the large, heavily padded gloves of kickboxing, you can hide behind your forearms.
But in the tiny 4-ounce gloves used in MMA, that low-handed openness is a catastrophic vulnerability, especially if an opponent possesses the foot speed to cross the distance faster than Pereira can lean back.
And Vakitov adds another layer to his hypothesis. He claims that Pereira's recent weight gain to move up into the heavyweight division will drastically hinder his mobility and reaction time.
Vakitov believes that Pereira's previous opponents haven't lost because of Pereira's technique. They've lost because they were psychologically paralyzed by the threat of his power.
They end up fighting off the back foot, retreating constantly out of sheer survival instinct.
So Vakitov is strongly advising Ciryl Gane, who is a natural, massive 265-pound heavyweight who moves with the agility of a middleweight, that he must apply relentless forward pressure.
He has to close the distance aggressively and dictate the tempo. Vakitov's core argument is that if Gane marches forward into the fire instead of retreating, Gane will secure a very quick, violent finish.
Structurally, Vakitov's theory is sound. When you fight moving backward against a stalker who possesses Pereira's extraordinary limb length, you are essentially just lingering at the end of his effective range.
You're just waiting for him to pull the trigger.
Exactly. By actively stepping forward and crowding the space, Gane could theoretically jam Pereira's long levers. A punch requires distance to accelerate and generate force.
If Gane smothers him, he removes the runway Pereira needs to generate that stone hand impact.
But here is the terrifying reality. Executing that game plan means you are willfully walking directly into the kill zone of the single most devastating left hook in the history of combat sports.
One microscopic miscalculation in your head movement as you step forward, and the fight is over.
It is a game of millimeters with massive consequences. We actually have Pereira's response to this entire scouting report, and his demeanor is chillingly unbothered.
Oh, yeah. He told reporters, quote, "It does not make a difference. Kickboxing and MMA are different sports. I've evolved a lot."
And he offered a very dark piece of advice for Gane. He said that if Artem Vakitov is truly an honest man, the only meaningful thing he will tell Cyril Gane behind closed doors is, quote, "Be careful with this guy, he's fucking tough."
Pereira's dismissal isn't just arrogance, though. It is rooted in a profound physiological truth.
Right. Kickboxing and mixed martial arts are fundamentally different athletic disciplines, specifically regarding how a fighter constructs their defensive stance.
In kickboxing, you can stand tall and light on your lead foot. In MMA, if you stand tall, you will get violently tackled to the mat by a wrestler.
You have to lower your center of gravity and widen your base to defend takedowns. But when you lower your center of gravity, your head becomes stationary.
And far more vulnerable to punches. The entire geometry of the fighting distance changes because the threat of the grappling clinch alters how fighters balance their weight.
So while Vakitov's insights from the kickboxing ring are historically accurate, Pereira's evolution inside the octagon makes him a vastly more complex puzzle.
He has learned to weaponize the MMA distance, making him vastly more deadly than the man Vakitov fought years ago at Glory 78.
But let's zoom out from the cage for a second, because we need to address the elephant in the room regarding the heavyweight division.
Oh, we definitely do.
We are analyzing an interim title fight. Why is it interim? Where is the actual champion? This requires us to provide the crucial business context happening far outside the octagon.
Tom Aspinall, the man a vast majority of analysts consider the true, undisputed force in the heavyweight division, is currently benched.
And the labyrinth of circumstances keeping Aspinall sidelined is a masterclass in the business of combat sports, completely superseding the athletic competition.
The timeline is important here. Aspinall recently fought Gane, and the bout ended in a catastrophic no contest due to an accidental eye poke in the very first round.
Following that deeply unsatisfying anticlimax, Aspinall's relationship with the UFC brass deteriorated rapidly. Looking for leverage, Aspinall made a seismic career move.
He signed a management deal with the high-profile boxing promoter Eddie Hearn of Matchroom Boxing.
And Eddie Hearn, who absolutely thrives on public conflict, immediately weaponized the media.
He launched a massive public relations assault against the UFC's pay structures,
openly criticizing how little mixed martial artists make compared to elite boxers. Hearn publicly demanded that the UFC release Aspinall from his exclusive contract,
boldly promising that he could secure exponentially higher guaranteed purses for Aspinall in the boxing ring or through cross-promotional events.
Hearn's strategy was designed to provoke, and it predictably drew a massive, fiery response from UFC CEO Dana White.
During a recent press conference for White's new venture, Zuffa Boxing, White used his platform to brutally mock Hearn.
White told the media that if Eddie Hearn is so passionate about releasing contracted fighters to seek better opportunities, Hearn should lead by example.
He told him to immediately release his own two-division boxing champion, Jesse Bam Rodriguez.
White's exact quote was, quote, "You release Bam Rodriguez then? Sounds pretty stupid, doesn't it?"
What we are witnessing is a classic high-stakes battle of monopolistic leverage between two rival promoters.
But the devastating real-world consequence is that Hearn is absolutely insisting Aspinall will not step foot back in the octagon under his current financial agreement.
Which leaves Aspinall, a man in his physical prime who should be defining an entire era of heavyweight fighting, completely paralyzed.
He is sidelined, waiting for the winner of Pereira versus Gane, while corporate lawyers and promoters engage in a war of attrition over percentages and contract lengths.
It perfectly illustrates the overarching theme of our deep dive today. control.
Eddie Hearn is aggressively trying to wrest control of Aspinall's financial trajectory away from the UFC.
While Dana White is exercising the ironclad leverage of the UFC's standard contract to maintain absolute, total control over his champion's career.
While that billion-dollar stalemate drags on, we should briefly note one other stylistic matchup to watch on this White House card. Former bantamweight champion Sean O'Malley explicitly requested a fight with the 6th-ranked Ayman Zahabi,
who recently secured a massive win over Marlon Vera.
And O'Malley has publicly stated he isn't looking to point fight. He is hunting for a spectacular, viral knockout.
That adds a fascinating layer of urgency to a card that is already defined by high-stakes striking. O'Malley understands the very business dynamics we just discussed.
He knows that in the UFC ecosystem, a viral, devastating knockout is the fastest way to accrue the kind of leverage Tom Aspinall is currently fighting for.
You perform spectacularly, you become undeniable, and you seize control of your own market value.
But you hit on something vital just a moment ago. The intricate tactical battles taking place on the canvas are frequently eclipsed by the ruthless tactical battles taking place in the corporate boardrooms.
And that understanding transitions us perfectly into examining the broader political and economic maneuverings of the UFC organization itself.
I completely agree. We are moving from the biomechanics of the cage to the high-finance tactics of the boardroom. Because the UFC White House event isn't merely a novel location to host a fight.
According to a deeply researched source we are reviewing today, this event represents the culmination of a highly calculated, decade-long political and corporate symbiosis.
Before we unpack the details of this next segment, I need to make a firm, explicit statement to you, the listener. We are analyzing a historical editorial written by combat sports journalist Timothy Wheaton.
Yes, and we want to be very clear about our stance.
Exactly. We as hosts are not taking sides on this issue. We are not endorsing these political views, nor are we making any political statements of our own.
Our singular purpose is to unpack the fascinating historical timelines and economic claims the author presents about the business evolution of mixed martial arts.
And examine how it ties directly into our theme of control. That boundary is essential.
Wheaton's editorial is a forensic examination of the corporate mythology surrounding the UFC, specifically focusing a critical lens on the long-standing public relationship between UFC CEO Dana White and Donald Trump.
And Wheaton's central thesis is highly provocative. He argues that Dana White's frequently repeated narrative that Donald Trump magnanimously saved the UFC during its darkest financial era is a carefully fabricated mythology designed to yield massive mutual benefits for both men.
Let's dig directly into the historical evidence Wheaton presents to support this, because he brings specific numbers.
The prevailing narrative, constantly championed by Dana White, suggests that in the early 2000s, the UFC was a pariah. They were banned from major cable pay-per-view providers.
Video rental chains refused to carry their tapes. And allegedly, no legitimate venue in America would host their barbaric events except for Donald Trump.
But Wheaton dismantles that exclusivity claim entirely. He points out that while Trump did indeed host 3 UFC events at his Taj Mahal casino between 2000 and 2001, the UFC actually successfully hosted 23 other events across the country from 2000 to 2004.
So they were not entirely blacklisted from the American venue landscape, as the myth suggests.
And when Wheaton examines the actual attendance figures, the narrative fractures even further. The events hosted at Trump's properties sold roughly 3,000 tickets each.
But immediately following those events, UFC 32 was held at the Continental Airlines Arena in New Jersey, which is a venue entirely unaffiliated with Trump.
That event sold 12,500 tickets. It represented a massive leap in commercial viability.
Furthermore, Wheaton uncovers the fact that Trump did not actually invite the UFC back to his casinos after those 2001 shows.
Instead, the management at the Taj Mahal chose to pivot their booking strategy toward established mainstream entertainment acts like Luciano Pavarotti, ZZ Top, and Pilling.
The clear economic implication is that at that specific moment in history, the UFC simply wasn't generating the immense revenue or the high society prestige that Trump demanded for his properties.
So if Donald Trump wasn't the sole savior of the UFC's financial viability, what actually was? Wheaton points to a cultural phenomenon that Dana White himself used to credit endlessly before the narrative shifted.
The ultimate fighter reality television show.
In 2005, Spike TV took a monumental gamble by airing TF. The reality show format acted as a brilliant Trojan horse.
It bypassed the pay-per-view paywalls and delivered MMA directly into the living rooms of millions of Americans on basic cable.
The finale of that inaugural season featured a legendary blood-soaked war between Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar.
That fight, supported by charismatic coaches like Chuck Liddell and Randy Couture, is universally recognized by historians of the sport as the true catalyst that dragged the UFC from the shadows into mainstream American stardom.
But what makes Wheaton's analysis truly fascinating is the history of direct, aggressive corporate competition between Trump and the UFC that occurred shortly after that mainstream explosion.
Right. Once the UFC proved the market was lucrative, Trump didn't align with them. He attempted to destroy them.
Trump threw his financial weight behind a direct competitor, Affliction MMA.
The Affliction era. For longtime fans, that was an absolutely wild period of corporate warfare.
It was a fascinating case study in market disruption. Affliction wasn't building from the ground up. They were aggressively poaching massive established stars that the UFC desperately wanted or had previously employed.
They signed former UFC heavyweight champions like Tim Sylvia and Andrei Arlovsky. They got light heavyweight terror Vitor Belfort.
And they secured the ultimate prize. Fedor Emelianenko, widely considered the greatest heavyweight on the planet at the time.
Trump was not quiet about his intentions either. He gave numerous interviews openly stating that Affliction possessed a superior product and was going to systematically dismantle the UFC's market share.
And Dana White responded with the kind of ruthless, monopolistic tactics that would define his career. The UFC did not ignore Affliction. They actively suffocated them through counter-programming.
When Affliction scheduled a massive pay-per-view event that required fans to spend $50, the UFC strategically scheduled a live event on Spike TV.
Completely free of charge, featuring their biggest, most electrifying star, Anderson Silva, at the exact same time.
They weaponized their massive tape library, running marathons of their greatest hits to deliberately siphon away the television audience.
They used their entrenched media leverage and superior infrastructure to bleed Affliction's venture capital dry. It was incredibly effective.
Affliction folded under the financial strain. And Dana White famously and kind of pettily put the Affliction brand name on a prop gravestone to celebrate his total victory.
Having firmly established this history of cutthroat, zero-sum competition, Wheaton poses the critical question: when and why did this bitter rivalry transform into the unshakable public alliance we see today?
Wheaton traces the genesis of the pivot back to the 2016 election cycle.
His argument is that when Donald Trump launched his presidential campaign, he faced a severe deficit in what political strategists call masculinity optics.
Trump's public persona was inextricably tied to reality television, coastal real estate elites, and appearances on daytime talk shows like The View.
By publicly aligning himself with the UFC, showing up cage-side in crucial swing states, surrounded by tattooed fighters, roaring crowds, and American flags, Trump instantly gained cultural access.
Access to a highly coveted demographic of young, working-class male voters. The UFC provided the visceral, hyper-masculine backdrop his political brand urgently required to contrast his coastal elite history.
But high-level relationships between billionaires are never just about friendship. They are fundamentally transactional.
If Trump secures the vital political optics, what tangible asset does the UFC extract from the relationship?
Wheaton claims the UFC receives immense regulatory goodwill, and he substantiates this claim by detailing a truly staggering sequence of events surrounding the recent corporate merger between Paramount and Skydance Media.
This is where the sheer scale of the business leverage becomes breathtaking. Wheaton meticulously outlines the timeline.
The Paramount and Skydance merger was a massive media consolidation that legally required approval from the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC.
Paramount's parent company also happens to own the CBS television network. Concurrently, Donald Trump was engaged in a massive lawsuit against CBS regarding what he claimed was an unfairly edited interview on the program 60 Minutes.
Just weeks before the FCC, which was led by a Trump-appointed chairman, was scheduled to vote on whether to approve the massive merger, Trump suddenly reached a settlement in his lawsuit against CBS for $16 million.
Shortly following that rapid settlement, the FCC formally approved the Paramount and Skydance merger.
And then, merely 18 days after that regulatory approval was finalized, the newly merged Paramount Plus streaming platform announced they had signed a groundbreaking 7-year, $7.7 billion broadcasting rights deal with the UFC.
$7.7 billion. That is a number that reshapes the entire landscape of global sports.
And to add one final layer to this financial ecosystem, Wheaton notes that Trump personally purchased millions of dollars in stock in TKO, the publicly traded parent company of the UFC, just days before the announcement of this massive UFC White House event.
Wheaton's conclusion does not mince words. He states this is not a brotherhood forged in the early days of a struggling sport.
It is a highly sophisticated, multi-billion-dollar transaction. The UFC secures a staggering media rights deal and an incredibly favorable regulatory environment to continue their monopolistic practices.
While Trump secures both the cultural optics for his political brand and substantial financial returns.
When you step back and connect these massive geopolitical and economic maneuverings to the overarching theme of our deep dive, it represents the absolute apex of control.
It is the mastery of utilizing personal relationships, manipulating media narratives, and navigating federal regulatory frameworks to construct an impregnable billion-dollar economic fortress around the fight promotion.
The repeated mythological narrative of Trump saving the UFC 2 decades ago serves as the foundational emotional folklore that justifies and publicly solidifies this incredibly lucrative modern alliance.
It's an intense, sobering look at the invisible macroeconomic strings pulling the puppets inside the cage.
And speaking of the UFC systematically consolidating its control, that perfectly bridges us to breaking news that emerged during the UFC Vegas 118 broadcast. We just outlined how they control the boardroom.
Well, the UFC has now announced they are seizing total, unchecked control over how their athletes are evaluated.
The broadcast confirmed that the UFC is permanently abandoning the system of media-voted fighter rankings.
Yes, the broadcast detailed a foundational shift in the sport's infrastructure. Historically, a panel of independent MMA media members submitted weekly votes to determine the top 15 rankings for each weight class.
However, Dana White has grown increasingly hostile toward this independent system.
He has clashed vehemently and publicly with the media over their rankings. Most notably, his furious insistence that Jon Jones must be ranked as the pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the world,
despite Jones suffering injuries and remaining entirely inactive for long stretches.
To eliminate this friction, the UFC is implementing an entirely proprietary algorithm. They claim this new system will be based strictly on measurable performance instead of opinion or popularity.
It is purportedly a purely mathematical formula designed to reward statistical outcomes inside the octagon.
But look, we have to pause here. I understand the desire to remove human bias, but I fundamentally reject the premise of this algorithm.
Right. If the UFC is consolidating control of the rankings by relying strictly on an algorithm for quote-unquote measurable performance, how does a line of code measure the vital intangibles of a fanged fight?
Exactly. Fighting is not a math equation.
Can an algorithm measure the context of a fighter stepping up on 3 days' notice to save a card, fighting a terrifying opponent, and showing incredible heart in a bloody loss? The code just sees a 0 in the win column.
Is this truly an evolution toward meritocracy, or is this just the UFC taking absolute control of their PR machine to ensure the rankings always perfectly align with their promotional desires?
Your pushback highlights the central philosophical crisis of combat sports analytics. A computer program can flawlessly track binary outcomes: wins, losses, total strikes landed, successful takedowns, and minutes of top control.
Those are quantifiable metrics. But fighting is, at its core, a chaotic, emotional human endeavor defined by unquantifiable suffering and resilience.
Consider a scenario where a fighter is violently dominated, outstruck, and outgrappled for 14.5 minutes, but miraculously catches their opponent in a triangle choke in the final 10 seconds. How does the algorithm weight that?
Does it punish the victor for the 14 minutes of statistical inferiority, or reward the final second of absolute finality?
Furthermore, removing independent journalists from the process eliminates the only existing layer of checks and balances. Rankings are not just prestige, they dictate a fighter's negotiating leverage, their pay scale, and their proximity to a championship contract.
If the promoter owns and programs the algorithm, the promoter possesses total, frictionless control over the exact economic trajectory of every single athlete on the roster.
It's a terrifyingly sterile vision of the sport. They want to distill human trauma and triumph into a clean, obedient spreadsheet. And honestly, looking at the sheer blood and guts we witnessed at UFC Vegas 118, it makes you wonder how an algorithm could possibly comprehend what actually happened when those cage doors locked. Before we dive deeper, shout out to our sponsors. First up, Elite Sports, leaders in premium fightwear for BJJ and MMA. Whether you're rolling or striking, they've got gear built to move with you. Check them out at elitesports.com. And if you're a school owner looking to optimize your dojo's performance, you need to check out Lotus by Open Black Belt. It's the ultimate management software for tracking ranks, attendance, and billing. They are currently offering a free trial to our listeners. Streamline your business so you can spend more time on the mats. Visit openblackbelt.com to start your trial today. You can find links for both in the show notes. And if you've got a story, news tip, or question, send it to us at budocast.com.
Moving away from the sterile algorithms and the billionaire boardrooms, let's refocus our attention on the canvas itself. Because the events at UFC Vegas 118, held inside the intimate Meta Apex facility, provided a visceral masterclass in what measurable performance actually entails when two humans collide and the spreadsheet becomes completely irrelevant.
The reality of the violence always shatters the theory. Let's examine the main event, which carried the heavy atmosphere of a generational changing of the guard in the welterweight division.
We watched the rising Brazilian contender, Gabriel Bonfim, execute a shockingly dominant performance against the highly respected former champion, Belal Muhammad.
Bonfim secured a unanimous decision, sweeping the judges' scorecards 50-45 across the board. It wasn't just a win, it was a total shutout.
It was a surgical, clinical dismantling by Bonfim, and the biomechanics of his strategy were brilliant.
He was tasked with fighting Belal Muhammad, a man whose entire career is built on a suffocating, relentless cardiovascular pace and elite chain wrestling.
Bonfim neutralized that entirely with a beautifully disciplined physics-based striking game. First, he utilized heavy, chopping leg kicks.
When you damage the lead leg of a wrestler, you destroy their ability to violently explode forward into a takedown. You literally remove the physical suspension required for the shot.
Second, he established a stiff, piston-like jab. A great jab isn't just about doing damage, it's a measuring stick and a physical barrier that constantly disrupted Muhammad's forward momentum, forcing him to reset his feet.
And once Muhammad was stationary, Bonfim fired pinpoint, devastating right hands over the top of Muhammad's guard.
We cannot overstate the concussive power Bonfim was generating with those right hands. Right around the midpoint of the third round, Bonfim stepped into a right cross that connected so violently with Muhammad's jaw that it literally ejected Muhammad's mouthpiece.
Sending it flying across the octagon canvas, the referee had to physically pause the fight, halting Bonfim's momentum just to retrieve the safety equipment.
To Muhammad's immense credit, his chin held up. He absorbed a horrifying amount of punishment and never once took a backward step. But strategically and physically, he was completely outgunned.
It is the harshest reality check the sport offers. Gabriel Bonfim improves his record to 19-1. He is riding an undeniable wave of momentum, actively calling out elite contenders like Jack Della Maddalena and firmly inserting himself into the immediate title picture.
He is the prototype of the new, highly evolved, multi-dimensional welterweight. Conversely, you look at Belal Muhammad, a former champion who spent years enduring immense physical grinding to climb to the absolute peak of the mountain, now suffering his third consecutive decisive loss.
At 38 years old, you have to seriously question the trajectory of his future. The physiology of a fighter is unforgiving.
As the body ages, fast-twitch muscle fibers deteriorate, and the ability to recover from neurological trauma slows down. The window of a fighter's physical prime is heartbreakingly brief, and once it begins to close, no amount of willpower can pry it back open.
It is a tragedy played out in real time, and if Bonfim's victory was a testament to clinical measured precision, the co-main event was a descent into absolute chaos.
Brendan Allen versus Edmund Shahbazyan was an all-action, horrific, bloody war. This is precisely the kind of fight that exposes the flaws in a mathematical algorithm.
Without question, Brendan Allen abandoned any pretense of point fighting. He utilized relentless, suffocating forward pressure and unleashed a truly terrifying arsenal of standing elbows.
The physiology of an elbow strike is vastly different from a punch. A gloved knuckle causes blunt force trauma, rattling the brain to cause a concussion. But the tip of the human elbow is a dense, sharp bone with minimal surface area.
When swung with rotational force, it acts like a scalpel. It slices through the delicate skin of the face instantly. Allen stepped into the pocket and just started carving.
He opened a massive, gaping laceration directly over Shahbazyan's left eye early in the fight. From that moment on, the visual of the fight was horrifying. It was two men fighting through a literal mask of blood.
Think about the psychological and physical nightmare of that for Shahbazyan. You are exhausted, your lungs are burning, and hot blood is constantly pouring into your eye, blinding your peripheral vision.
Yet he fought with almost terrifying heart. He was firing back massive overhand rights that repeatedly tested Allen's jaw.
But Allen's sheer offensive output and the compounding visual and physical damage inflicted by those elbows overwhelmed Shahbazyan across 15 minutes.
Allen secured the unanimous decision, 30-27, 30-27, 29-28, successfully defending his top 5 ranking in the middleweight division. It was a blender of violence.
But then, on that exact same card, we were presented with a radically different expression of control. Bryce Mitchell made his highly anticipated return to the bantamweight division, facing the previously undefeated prospect Santiago Luna.
And this performance was, well, let's just say it severely tested the patience of the live audience inside the Apex.
It was the absolute definition of a smothering, lay-and-pray, grappling performance. But let's explain what that actually means mechanically. Mitchell wasn't just resting on Luna.
Mitchell secured early, explosive takedowns, bypassed Luna's defensive guard, and established heavy top control. He flattened Luna out, using his own body weight and the immutable laws of gravity to pin Luna's hips to the mat.
He systematically shut down every single avenue of Luna's offense. It was not aesthetically pleasing to watch, and the crowd loudly voiced their displeasure with a chorus of boos.
But from a purely tactical standpoint, it was flawless. Mitchell completely minimized his own risk of absorbing damage while constantly forcing Luna to carry the weight of 2 men, rapidly draining the prospect's energy reserves.
And the climax of the fight proved the sheer brilliance of Mitchell's fight IQ. After spending almost 14 full minutes doing nothing but holding Luna down and exhausting him, Mitchell waited until the absolute final seconds of the fight to execute a finishing sequence.
With less than 10 seconds remaining on the clock in round 3, Mitchell transitioned smoothly from the full mount position.
He isolated Luna's arm, pushing it across Luna's own neck, trapped it with his head, and locked his arms together to secure a vicious arm triangle choke.
The mechanism of an arm triangle is devastating. It uses the opponent's own bicep to compress one carotid artery, while the attacker's shoulder compresses the other. It completely cuts off the flow of oxygenated blood to the brain.
Luna, utterly exhausted, had no choice but to tap out at 4 minutes and 52 seconds of the final round.
The strategy of that timing is what fascinates me. Why spend 14 minutes doing nothing, only to attempt the submission with 8 seconds left?
Because it is a brilliant piece of risk mathematics. If you attempt a complex submission, like an arm triangle in the first round, you have to loosen your physical control to adjust your grips.
If the opponent is fresh, they can scramble out of that tiny window of space, reverse the position, and suddenly you are the one stuck on the bottom absorbing elbows.
By waiting until the final 10 seconds, Mitchell knew that even if he made a mistake and lost the dominant position, the final bell would ring before Luna had time to capitalize on the error.
Mitchell systematically broke Luna's physical and mental resistance for 14 minutes and then snatched the blood choke when Luna was far too depleted to fight off the grip.
That isn't just winning. That is the total, measurable control of another human being.
It is the cerebral execution of violence. Now, looking beyond the physical techniques of grappling and striking, the Vegas 118 card provided us with some profound narratives regarding mental reconstruction.
We watched Tom Nolan secure a coveted top 15 ranking in the lightweight division by defeating the highly skilled Fares Zayem via hard-fought unanimous decision.
But the actual physical fight is secondary to the psychological angle here. Tom Nolan was fighting to rebuild himself after suffering the only loss of his career, a devastating 1-minute knockout at the hands of Nicholas Mata during his UFC debut.
I want you to really think about the terror of that scenario. Think about the most public, humiliating, professional failure you've ever experienced. A totally botched presentation, a failed exam, a fired client.
Now, imagine having to walk back into that exact same room under bright lights with millions of people watching on television, knowing that the man standing across from you has the trained ability to physically render you unconscious.
That is the ghost Tom Nolan was fighting. A first-round knockout shatters the psychological illusion of invincibility that fighters rely on.
Nolan opened up with remarkable vulnerability in his post-fight interview. He admitted that prior to that knockout, he was paralyzed by perfectionism.
He obsessed over cutting every ounce of weight perfectly. He stressed over every microscopic detail of his fight week routine, and he was buckling under the immense, suffocating pressure of being touted as an undefeated generational prospect.
When Mata shut his lights out in 60 seconds, it forced a total, agonizing mental reset.
Perfectionism is often disguised as a virtue, but in the chaotic environment of combat sports, it creates a dangerous brittleness. If your entire mental architecture relies on everything going perfectly, the first moment of adversity causes a catastrophic collapse.
Nolan realized this. He stated that for this fight against Siam, he genuinely didn't care if he lost. He stripped away the expectations of the fans and the media.
His singular goal was to prove to himself that he wasn't paralyzed by the fear of stepping back into the fire.
Looking at Belal Muhammad, a veteran champion sliding down the rankings after his third loss, contrasted with Tom Nolan, a young prospect actively conquering the crippling trauma of his own recent defeat. I look at this and wonder.
Is the most dangerous opponent in MMA the highly trained killer standing across the cage? Or is it the lingering ghost of your own last failure?
From a neurological standpoint, it is unquestionably the ghost of failure. The physical opponent across the cage is a known, measurable quantity.
You can watch hours of tape on them, you can hire sparring partners to mimic their timing, you can physically prepare to slip their right hook.
But the trauma of your last defeat lives deeply embedded within your own central nervous system. It subtly triggers hesitation when you need to pull the trigger. It makes you second-guess your automated reflexes.
Nolan overcoming that psychological trap, realizing that the obsessive pursuit of perfection was actually making him fragile, is a monumental evolutionary leap.
He learned the hardest way possible that the capacity to absorb failure and maintain your composure is infinitely more valuable than the illusion of invincibility.
And speaking of incredible mental adaptability, we absolutely must highlight Gisela Chaves. She secured a gritty, hard-fought, split decision over Eunice Dubin in her official UFC debut.
But her origin story sounds like fiction. She didn't grow up wrestling in high school or practicing karate as a child. She literally entered the combat sports ecosystem as a ring girl.
She was hired to hold up the round cards at a local regional Muay Thai event. But simply being in that environment changed her. She decided to step off the apron and start training with the promoter of that very event.
She fell in love with the grueling, unglamorous grind of the gym, transitioned her skills to mixed martial arts, violently fought her way to a UFC contract on the Contender Series, and is now an undefeated professional fighter on the world's biggest stage.
Her journey is a testament to the profound neuroplasticity of the human brain when exposed to specific environments. She walked into a space explicitly designed for combat.
Initially, her role was purely aesthetic, but there is a very specific, undeniable frequency in a fight gym. The smell of the mats, the sound of shins hitting heavy bags, the stark, undeniable reality of the physical work being done.
Being immersed in that atmosphere literally rewired her neural pathways, altering her entire life trajectory from an observer of violence to a practitioner of it.
It is an incredible transformation. But to round out our analysis of Vegas 118, we must also examine the brutal, unforgiving consequences of failing to respect the physical demands of the sport.
At the official weigh-ins, Junior Tafa failed to hit the light heavyweight limit, missing weight by half a pound against Iwo Baraniski. Half a pound sounds negligible to a normal person, but in this sport, it signifies a catastrophic failure in preparation.
And whether it was the traumatic physiological toll of a botched weight cut or simply a terrible performance, the fight brutally reflected that lack of discipline.
The bout lasted a mere 1 minute and 25 seconds into the very first round. Baraniski swarmed him, securing a rapid TKO via a relentless barrage of leg kicks and heavy punches.
The octagon simply does not forgive a lack of physical preparation.
It cannot forgive it because the physics of the human body won't allow it. When a fighter mismanages a weight cut, they are essentially severely dehydrating themselves.
When you drain the water from your body, you also drain the cerebrospinal fluid that acts as a shock absorber surrounding your brain. Your physical chin is literally compromised.
Your neurological reaction time slows down by crucial milliseconds, and your body's ability to absorb kinetic trauma diminishes drastically. Baraniski recognized the lethargy and capitalized on that physiological vulnerability instantly.
The psychological battles, the intense physical discipline, the paralyzing fear of failure, these elements aren't exclusive to the UFC Octagon. We see these exact same human struggles playing out across all disciplines of combat sports, from the glaring lights of the boxing ring to the sweaty mats of local gyms across the world.
Let's step beyond the specific confines of the UFC for a moment and examine the broader global combat sports landscape.
The broader landscape offered some incredibly intense, sobering action this week. Over at Zuffa Boxing 7, we witnessed a cruiserweight clash between Chris Billum-Smith and Ryan Rizicki.
This fight was a haunting testament to human endurance and the terrifying reality of finding a fighter's breaking point. Riziki came out in the early rounds like an absolute firecracker, applying a relentless, suffocating pace.
But in round 3, the physics of the fight shifted. Belal Smith timed a slight dip by Riziki and rocked him with a vicious, perfectly placed uppercut.
Riziki's legs completely betrayed him, but he survived the round purely on adrenaline and grit. He even managed to bounce back and win the 4th round on sheer willpower.
But willpower cannot stop the physiological accumulation of brain trauma. In round 6, Belal Smith found his range entirely and unleashed a truly horrifying onslaught.
He trapped Riziki and landed at least a dozen unanswered, massive punches, with both hands flush to the jaw. Riziki somehow survived the round without collapsing, but his equilibrium was completely shattered. His chin was gone.
When he came out for round 7, he was essentially a walking heavy bag. After he absorbed another slew of brutal, unanswered punishment, Riziki's corner stepped in and mercifully threw the white towel into the ring at the 3-minute mark, forcing the referee to halt the bout and saving Riziki from further permanent damage.
Throwing that towel is arguably the heaviest, most difficult responsibility a cornerman bears. It is their job to protect a fighter from the consequences of their own bravery. Riziki is wired to fight until he is physically incapacitated or unconscious. His pride would never allow him to quit.
But the experienced corner recognized that the crucial line between athletic competition and permanent life-altering neurological damage had been crossed. It's a very stark, very dark reminder of the extreme physical toll this specific profession demands.
And sometimes the sport isn't just brutal, it is infuriatingly chaotic and fragile. Over in Europe at Octagon 89, the main event between Igor Severino and Zhalgas Zhumagulov ended in deep controversy.
Severino was putting on a clinic in the first round. He dominated the grappling, pinning Zhumagulov against the cage, and was landing brutal, rib-cracking body blows and heavy right hands. He was in total control.
But early in round 2, Severino threw an inside leg kick that missed its target by a few inches and landed as a massive, accidental low blow to the groin. The referee paused the action, and Zhumagulov was given the full, legally mandated 5 minutes to recover.
But the physical trauma was too severe.
Right.
He simply couldn't stand up. The fight was called off, ending in a deeply frustrating no contest.
That scenario highlights the terrifying fragility of the entire fight business. Think about the investment required to reach that moment. Both men underwent 10 grueling weeks of a training camp, spending thousands of dollars on coaches and nutritionists.
They suffered through the agony of weight cutting, fulfilled exhausting media obligations, all culminating in the spotlight of a main event. And that entire monumental effort is instantly wiped out, rendered completely meaningless by an accidental miscalculation of 3 inches on a single kick.
It proves that the violent chaos of combat cannot ever be entirely sanitized, predicted, or controlled, regardless of how tightly the promoter is trying to grip the reins.
Which brings us to our final source for this deep dive, and frankly, I think it is the most important one we have. We've spent an hour talking about billionaire leverage, sterile algorithms, the physics of a knockout, and the strategy of the cage. But let's bring it all the way back to the foundational human element.
We are analyzing a deeply personal editorial written by a journalist named Stephen Russo, simply titled, How Martial Arts Changed My Life in 5 Years.
This piece is vital because it forcefully grounds every high-level concept we've discussed today. Stephen Russo isn't a UFC champion with a multi-million-dollar contract. He isn't a ruthless billionaire promoter. He started his journey as just a casual guy sitting on his couch.
He writes about watching the brutal knockout in the Kamaru Usman versus Jorge Masvidal rematch at UFC 261. The sheer spectacle hooked him, and he started casually researching the history of the sport. But his transition from a passive observer of violence to an active participant is where the true psychological magic happens.
Right. Russo sets the scene beautifully. He writes about being a young man trying to navigate that incredibly difficult, confusing chapter of life where you're finishing high school, entering college, and feeling profoundly lost and aimless. On a particularly low, depressing day, a friend of his basically dragged him, completely unannounced and unprepared, to a local gym called New England Taekwondo.
He walked onto the mats and was thrown directly into a grueling, full-contact kickboxing class. Now, Russo had played traditional sports his whole life, baseball, tennis, the standard suburban athletics, but he writes that halfway through this kickboxing class, he felt like he was locked in a bitter war with his own physical body.
He was completely exhausted, his lungs were burning for oxygen, he was physically battered, and he was on the verge of throwing up. But instead of running away, he fell deeply in love with the sheer honesty of the challenge.
And Russo highlights one specific defining crucible moment that captures the true essence of the martial arts journey. He had been training consistently for a while. He had incorporated Brazilian jiu-jitsu and heavy weightlifting into his routine. His ego was building. He genuinely believed he was making significant, undeniable progress as a fighter.
And then he booked a private, one-on-one session with his head coach, Sean Akisi. And the coach just systematically, effortlessly wrecked him. Russo got absolutely dominated, controlled, beaten up, and physically humbled. He walked out of the gym that day feeling utterly dejected, frustrated, and questioning his entire journey.
But here is the massive philosophical insight that anchors the entire essay. Instead of quitting, instead of letting his bruised ego dictate his actions, that severe physical beating completely rewired his worldview. He realized that experiencing setbacks on the gym mats, and by extension, experiencing failures in the real world, are not poor reflections of his inherent character.
Getting dominated by his coach was not a moral failure. It was simply an opportunity to identify a physical weakness and gather raw data to improve.
That realization is a fundamental shift in psychological neuroplasticity. When you experience physical trauma, exhaustion, or total defeat within the controlled, honest environment of a martial arts gym, and you actively make the choice to tape up your hands and return the very next day, you are literally constructing tenacity.
You are building thicker neurological pathways for resilience. The martial arts taught Russo profound discipline. It taught him how to breathe through panic and face physical discomfort. And most importantly, it taught him how to apply that hard-earned resilience to the chaotic, unpredictable challenges he faces entirely outside the gym walls in his daily life.
The connections are just so incredibly powerful. When you look at Steven Russo getting physically wrecked by his coach on a terrible day and using that very defeat to find his life's direction and build his character, you can draw a direct, undeniable line to Tom Nolan.
Nolan overcame the paralyzing trauma of his one-minute knockout to rebuild his fractured mind and secure a top 15 ranking in the hardest sport in the world.
You can draw a direct line to Gabriel Bonfim, meticulously executing a brilliant physics-based game plan to dismantle a former champion. The physical techniques we spend so much time analyzing, the carotid compressing arm triangles, the nerve-deadening leg kicks, the piston-like jabs, those are merely the mechanical vehicles.
The real, tangible, enduring product of the martial arts is the unshakable mental fortitude it constructs within the human being.
And that internal fortitude is the ultimate, purest form of control we have been searching for throughout this entire deep dive. Think about it. You cannot control if an opponent accidentally throws a low blow that ruins your 10-week training camp, like we saw with Zumagulov.
You cannot control if a billionaire promoter uses their monopolistic leverage to bench you over a contract dispute, like Tom Aspinall is enduring. You certainly cannot control the terrifying millisecond speed of an Ilya-Topuria combination coming at your chin.
The only variable in this chaotic universe that you have absolute total control over is your response to the adversity. Do you let the terrifying ghost of your last defeat break your spirit, or do you step back onto the mats, face the fire, and let the setback become the architectural blueprint for your own evolution?
We started this deep dive looking at the UFC's corporate attempt to create a perfectly sterile, mathematical, measurable performance algorithm to rank their fighters. But after spending an hour looking at Tom Nolan conquering his deepest fears, Edmund Shabazan fighting on pure instinct through a blinding mask of his own blood, and Steven Russo finding his life's entire direction simply by getting beat up on his worst day. It's a wonder.
Can a line of code or a mathematical formula ever truly measure the size of a fighter's heart? Think about that the next time you watch someone make that long, lonely walk and step onto the mats. That's it for this episode of Budocast. Thanks for joining us as we break down the latest in martial arts. We'll be back soon with more news, stories, and insights. Until then, train hard, stay humble.